Welcome to the Draft Board, where hosts David Song and Tyson Workington tackle the topics that you want to hear. From the rink to the turf to the court, anything and everything. This is the Draft Board.
All right, good day, ladies and gentlemen, and man, it's been a long time since we've been with you here on the Draft Board. Alongside my good buddy Tyson, I'm David, and as you no doubt can tell, we've taken a break for much of the summer. I'm sure that everybody has had their own things to do. I know that I've been keeping very busy, working out at Camp Evergreen, and also, of course, watching 6 to 9 hours of Olympics a day, because that is what I do. I love the Olympics more than any other sporting event on the planet Earth. And Tyson, you know this about me. How has your summer been?
It's been really good. I've been able to kind of just do my own thing, and I'm having an okay time here. It's nice that we have some sun, now, and BC. Unfortunately, everything going on over there, the fires and stuff, we're getting a lot of smoke. But it's good to be in the summer. It's always nice to have warm weather, and I'm doing well.
That's good to hear, and we hope that everybody else has managed to. I'm not so sure about staying busy, but staying productive and making the most out of the summer. We hope that everyone, at least in Canada, has been celebrating the end of the mask mandates as hopefully a sign that everything is going to, well, again, we can't be sure, but hopefully things will be looking up from here. It's been a difficult year for many, but enough about that. We're not here to talk about COVID-19. We're here to talk about sports, and instead of just one feel-good story, why don't we talk about a whole bunch of them? Because, hey, we're both Canadians. Canada has been, by our standards, lighting it up at these Olympic Games. And sure, we may never catch China and the Russian Olympic Committee. Definitely, doping's bad, kids. China, the Russian Olympic Committee, and the USA in terms of medal count, but there's been plenty to celebrate for Canadian sports fans during this Games, hasn't there?
Yeah, it's been, exciting to watch, and, you always got to try and support your country. I'm a big fan of Canadian sports, Canadian athletes, and it's always great to see them do well in international competition. I remember a few years ago, we didn't know very much about Penny Oleksiak or Andre DeGrasse, but they came on the world stage and they're, super competitive, and they've really galvanized our hearts, and I love that, and I think that's so awesome and so special because it's the next generation inspiring the next generation.
Oh man, ever since I was a teenager, I've been fantasizing about Marvel movies starring Penny Oleksiak and Andre DeGrasse, and specifically Canadian Olympic athletes. The Olympics have captured my imagination throughout my life, both the Summer and the Winter Olympics, and like you said, these athletes have galvanized our hearts. I think that's a great way to put that. Certainly for me, I've always looked up to athletes like this, and as an older person and as a sports journalist, I think I have I know I have a more mature outlook on, humans are human beings, and these aren't necessarily these Supermen and Captain Americas out there that we are looking up to, but they're still incredibly talented people, and the ones that are worth cheering for are great human beings as well, and I think those are the ones that we celebrate the most, or should celebrate the most. Penny Oleksiak, in my opinion, definitely falls into that category. She was a 4-time Olympic medalist back in Rio 5 years ago. Was 5 years ago. That's insane to me.
Yeah.
A 16-year-old girl, I was probably one of a minority of Canadians that actually knew that her older brother, Jamie Oleksiak, was in the NHL. But, this girl took the Olympics by storm. One of her medals was a gold medal in the 100-meter freestyle, a marquee event in the pool, and she was so impressive, and this year she lived up to the encore for the most part. She wasn't able to medal again in the 100-meter freestyle, but let me tell you, folks, she was up against an absolute murderer's row of opponents, including the Australians. Emma McKeon is the fastest woman in the world this year. She raced like it. Kate Campbell had a really a redemptive Olympics after another Australian, by the way, she was a gold medal favorite in multiple sprint events in the 2016 Rio Olympics, didn't win anything, and was so crushed that she quit and retired for a couple of years. But she came back and she won, I believe it was a bronze medal in the 100-meter freestyle and a couple of relay medals with this incredibly strong Australian women's team. Coming out party for her. I know for a fact that there's at least a couple. There's also this lady named Siobhan Haughey from Hong Kong, who is, I believe she's like 23, 25. She is incredibly fast, and I believe she was the one that beat out Penny for the bronze in the 100-meter freestyle. I'll have to double check that a little bit later in the show, but anyways, it was even though Penny didn't quite manage to defend her gold in that event, she still has a silver and 2 bronzes, including a very grueling one in the 200-meter freestyle. Very, very difficult event. And again, one thing that she said that I really thought was cool was that when she won her 7th ever Olympic medal, becoming, by the way, I'm sure all of you have heard this by now, the most decorated Canadian Olympian in history, either games, which is nuts. She's 21 years old.
That's crazy.
And she said in the interview that, like, and this was coming off a bit of a disappointment in the 100-meter freestyle, and she said, I'm glad I didn't win that medal on an individual event, because to win it with my team makes it 10 times sweeter, and that's amazing. Like, I mean, 21-year-old professional athlete, like many of them hit stardom and it just all goes to their head, but clearly she was raised the right way.
Yeah, that's really great to see that she has that team mindset and that willingness to be able to say, yeah, I want to celebrate this win with my team because, you know, we all worked so hard to get there. I think that's something that's really special and really important. And, you know, I always think back to, you know, the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, Alex Bilodeau winning the first gold medal on Canadian soil for that Olympics.
And the floodgates just opened.
And the floodgates opened. It was just such a special moment. You know, I always remember that. Yeah. And, you know, for this Olympics, up until a few days ago, all of our medals were won by women.
Yes.
Right? And, like, our women were just, you know, really right there at the top of the competition winning medals. And I think that's so great to see, you know, the Canadian ladies just doing so well and performing at the highest stage and having that great success. And definitely Penny Oleksiak is part of that. And, you know, I think that's something so special. And I think that, you know, with all of that being said, I'm so proud of the Canadian national team for all that they've accomplished. And I can't wait to see how some of these athletes grow and develop and get better for even the next Olympics.
Right, you are. I just wanted to correct myself on something I said earlier. Siobhan Haughey, the Hong Kong athlete, actually won the silver in the 100-meter freestyle, which is, like, I mean, really Hong Kong. Like, that's incredibly impressive. Kate Campbell of Australia was one that just beat out Penny Oleksiak for the bronze in the 100-meter freestyle. I actually want to talk a bit about her because even though she's not Canadian, she's an Aussie. She's kind of a cool story because she's about, I believe, about 6'3", 6'4", and like an awesome specimen physically. And coming into the Rio 2016 Summer Olympics, she was a gold medal favorite in all the sprint disciplines because physically she had the tools and she had the raw talent to do incredibly well. And she did not win any individual medals. Her only medals were in the relays, and it was so crushing to her that she actually retired for a period of time to deal with it. And so to see her come back and win a few more medals with the Aussie relay team, which is honestly in most of the races they were very overpowered, but for her to finally get her own individual medal at the Olympics is something that I feel like that's good. Like, even though, you know, she beat out my girl, but it's still sort of a silver lining or a bronze lining that I feel good about because I think redemption is a huge part of the narrative of sports in general, and whenever you can take it, it's good to see.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the Olympics and international competition usually brings out some of the best stories in athletes, you know, just the adversity that some of these athletes have to go to, and then they get to the podium and they finally get to have that opportunity to, you know, celebrate all that they've accomplished so far. I think that's something that is so spectacular for us to watch. You know, as an athlete, I understand the amount of preparation and practice and treatment and just the work that it takes for, you know, you to perform at your best. And, you know, these athletes for the Olympics, they're performing at the highest level. They're, you know, the stakes have never been higher. And, you know, they've been training 4 years for this moment, all that time, all that preparation, all of that work. And we get to see the culmination of that. And we get to see the results. And we get to celebrate with these athletes when they do well.
Yeah.
And that's just something that is so spectacular. And I think, like, as a viewer, even as a former athlete, oftentimes I forget myself how much work some of these athletes have put in.
100%.
Especially, like, some of the harder ones, like the triathlon, the decathlon, like the multi-level of events. Like, man, like, that must take so much time.
For sure.
And, yeah, you know what? It's super awesome to be able to see and celebrate with the athletes as they do well, regardless of where they're from.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Going back to Penny Oleksiak for a second, as you know, it amuses me to no end that Jamie Oleksiak is literally in the NHL.
Just signed a $20+ million contract.
And his baby sister was more popular than him at 16 years of age. And, you know, now granted, Jamie since then has made a Stanley Cup final with Dallas as a top 4, top 6 defenseman. He's definitely more famous now than it was 5 years ago. Still, I think that there's little doubt that overall Penny is a more popular athlete than Jamie probably is. And I mean, I love Jamie Oleksiak. He's this huge defenseman who is fully capable of dominating, but it's just, I like the dude a lot, but it's still just so funny to me that this is their family dynamic and what I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall in some of those dinner table conversations.
Seeing Penny Oleksiak and yeah, I remember she tweeted out one thing about how when she was in school, she told one of her teachers that she wanted to be a swimmer, and that was something that she was passionate about. And the teacher said, you'll never do this. You'll never go anywhere with swimming. And she's just like, just shout out to my teacher who said this back in the 4th grade or something like that. And here I am winning medals now. So I think that it's really interesting to see, like, how much, you know, Penny has gone through the adversity, like, in her own life, going up and going through the pool and going through swimming. And, you know, her ability to compete at the highest level at 16 years old is remarkable enough. But just to see how far she's gone since then.
Yeah, and like we said before, she's still only 21. She's probably, like, you know, if all goes right, Lord willing, she's got 2 more Olympics left in her.
Maybe more.
Maybe more, maybe 3. Hey, certainly with Brent Hayden coming back at 37 years of age, that's another one right there. Like, Brent Hayden retired after the 2012 Olympics after becoming a bronze medalist. And then he fell back in love with the sport and came back successfully at 37. He didn't win any medals, but in the men's 4x100 relay, he swam 100 meters in about, I believe, 47.9 seconds at 37 years of age.
That's impressive.
Incredibly impressive. And at the other end of the spectrum, some of you may know Canada has a 14-year-old on their Olympic swim team. Her name's Summer McIntosh. If memory serves, she beat Penny Oleksiak in the 200 meter at the Canadian Olympic trials. And she set at least she didn't win any individual medals, but she set at least 2 Canadian records competing against 20, 25, 30-year-old women who have, like, just so much more muscle and strength and power than her.
And experience.
And experience on top of it. And it's absolutely nuts how this sort of thing just keeps happening at the Olympic Games.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's always crazy to see some of these stories, like, come out of nowhere. And, you know, I love the storylines, and I think that that's something that, like, sports is always going to have because it's so compelling. I think there's a real big difference in sports between looking at a piece of paper and seeing the results, but as human beings, we gravitate towards people with stories.
Yes.
And the stories that are told at the Olympics are emotional, and they're heartbreaking, and they're overcoming, and it's so incredible to learn about some of these athletes' stories, where they come from, what they had to go up through, what their context is like. Are they a new, young, in-breaking athlete, or are they nearing the end of their career hoping for one last gasp at a medal? I think that it's super great to learn and hear about some of these stories and yeah, root for the stories and root for the narratives that these people have, because that's what they've lived to get here.
Like, how many sports can you have a team with an age range of 14 to 37? Summer McIntosh, this skinny junior high girl who is ludicrously fast and has a ludicrous amount of endurance to be able to compete at the world level. On the other hand, Brent Hayden, this powerfully built 6'4" but aging athlete who decided he was done with retirement for the time being. He even put out on social media after his games that he has currently not ruled out Paris as a possibility.
Right.
So wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Who knows? But that's just so cool. And here's another incredible story for you guys. Maggie McNeil, who, as some of you know, won three medals for the pool for Canada, including a 100-meter butterfly victory over the reigning Olympic champion Sarah Schuström of Sweden. Incredibly impressive. She was actually born in China. She was actually born in China, but was abandoned by her biological parents when she was only a few months old, and she was adopted by her current Canadian family, which is why she's now Canadian and now an Ontarian. And, first and foremost, it's always amazing, I think, that families who want to adopt can sometimes just do such a service to the world for giving children a second chance at life in many ways. However, when those children end up becoming Olympic medalists, you also kind of have that athletic side of it where, man, China maybe let one get away here. China, with their incredibly strong swim team, if things had played out differently, maybe they could have added another gold medal to their haul, but instead, as Canadians, we're the beneficiary of that, and I will take it.
Yeah, I think that there are some countries that don't necessarily like that about international competition. They kind of like a more nationalist kind of thing, like you play for the country that you were born in,
right?
That kind of thing. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that if you're an immigrant of a country, you're a part of that country. You're now Canadian. And I think that, Canada has done a good job of letting people come to this nation who are from different cultures, different backgrounds, different, nations. And, they come in and they want to be Canadian. And I think like a good example of this is Alphonso Davies, who
absolutely,
he was born in different country.
Soccer star, FYI.
Yeah, he's a soccer star. He's a very, very prominent player. He plays for Bayern Munich in the German league for soccer there. And, he was born in Ghana. His family came over when he was young and kind of grew up, kind of around, I think it was Toronto and that kind of great. No, it was Edmonton. Sorry, it was the Edmonton kind of area. And man, Alphonso Davies, he's proud to be Canadian. He loves representing Canada in international competition, and so do these athletes. And who am I to say that their home country isn't here? I think that that's something so special that these, people come from, impoverished communities or, tough neighborhoods or countries that they don't want to be in, and they come to Canada and then they get to represent Canada as a nation.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. As the son of two immigrants myself, for me personally, there has not been a single minute of my life where I've identified as Chinese or even Chinese Canadian. I am Canadian,
right?
Period. And I'm also American.
Even though you were born in New York.
But I am also American in a sense. I mean, I'll be honest, Canada will always be number one in my heart. Like, I am Canadian, but I'm also American because I was born there, and I thank God for the opportunity to have grown up in this country, to also have been born in the States, which has opened so many doors and might open so many more in my sports journalism career. I think it's awesome that sometimes people get to find a second lease on life in another country, and I fully agree with you. They're as much a part of that country as anybody else, and that's what matters most. And this is actually a great transition into the next thing I was going to talk about, because Lamont Marcel Jacobs, the current fastest man in the world at 100 meters, same story as what you were just talking about. He's actually an American, but he has an Italian mom. His parents divorced when he was very young, and he switched allegiances to Italy to compete in the Olympics.
Oh.
And he is the man that won this year's 100-meter final as the Olympic champion. How about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, and he ran a heck of a time, too, 9.80 seconds, which, by the way, is the same time that Usain Bolt ran to win the gold in Rio 5 years ago. He's a big man, fast guy, and obviously he finished ahead of an American, Fred Kerley, 9.84 seconds. The cool thing about Fred Kerley is he was a converted 400-meter runner. Very rare skill set to be able to convert from really kind of a much more of an intermediate distance to a dead sprint like the 100. And the man of the hour, Andre de Grasse, who won his second bronze medal in the 100 meters. That obviously, as we know, was not the peak of his Olympic Games. But one thing that's very interesting that a lot of people may not know, if they don't follow track, and if they don't pay attention to Olympics coverage, is that sprinting is about more than just going fast. It's obviously about going fast, but one thing that I've really learned this Games is that you actually need to relax in order to be a great sprinter and to run your best. Same for distance events, but in a different way. But when you think about a race that's over in, well, for men, like less than 11 seconds, it may seem very, very strange to say that, oh, you need to relax. But it's actually true, because if you watch the athletes, the more tense you get, the more, you're not going to be able to actually perform at your best, because your muscles are locked up. You're not actually be able to do your best. And the other thing is mentally, right? I think we know across all sports, a stressed out athlete is usually not going to perform their best, because they'll get in their own heads and they will oftentimes fail to execute a task that their body's physically capable of executing because they weren't in the right headspace. And if you still don't believe me, let's talk about a man named Trayvon Bromell, who is an American sprinter. Guess what? He was actually the gold medal favorite in the men's 100 meters this year. He dominated the track season beforehand. World's fastest man with a 9.77 second clocking, which, if he had ran that in the final, would have beat Lamont Jacobs for gold. And anything, by the way, just anything under 9.9 seconds in men's sprinting is elite, and anything under 9.8 is world class. Like, that's like franchise.
Yeah.
That's franchise
like
speed.
We can't always keep comparing every sprinter to Bolt.
No.
Because Bolt was like 1 in a million,
Usain Bolt's world record, guys, 9.58 seconds. He's the only man in history to have gone under 9.6, and that I'm not sure that world record is going to get touched for a long time.
Yeah, it might be a while before somebody goes after that record, but 9.8 is very, very, very good.
Yeah, and so, anyway, so Trayvon Bromell, just to give you an idea, he really burnt it down during the course of the track season. He won a lot of races this year, and he had the fastest clocking in the world this year. But here's the thing. He gets to the Olympic Games. He runs 10.05 in his heat, which is a problem because he finished fourth in his heat, and only the top 3 get to advance to the semifinals. And so he actually had to sit there and wait until it was determined that after all the heats, he was among the 2 fastest losers, and he did make the semifinals. So a man with a 9.77 personal best went to the semifinals. Guess what? He ran 10 seconds flat in the semifinals in a photo finish with a Nigerian, Enoch Adegoke. They had to go to the thousandths of a second to separate these two. And it turned out that Enoch Adegoke crossed the line in the semifinal, 1/1000th of a second ahead of the world number 1 Trayvon Bromell. And guess what? Trayvon Bromell was not among the two fastest losers, and he did not even qualify for the Olympic final in which Andre DeGrasse won a bronze and Lamont Jacobs won a gold. How about that?
Yeah, that's probably not something that he wanted. I think that if you were to go and ask him, he would be extremely disappointed with that result.
He certainly was.
Yeah, and I can understand that. For me, growing up in sports, like crunch time was always something that I sometimes struggled with. And, going up and it's kind of like the big game, the big final, this is your big moment. It puts a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And if you don't know how to handle that, then it's going to affect you and it's going to be tough. And, it's unfortunate for him that it had to happen this way. And obviously, I wish him the best in the next time he competes. But I hope that he can take this as a learning example and not get too hung up on it and learn from his mistakes and learn how to control his, maybe his mind more, or if it was a technique problem, maybe it's a technique thing that he needs to fix. But not everything that needs to get fixed in sports is physical. A lot of times it's mental.
Yeah.
Like I remember growing up in hockey as a goalie, like I remember I was 13 years old and I was talking with this coach, and my coach was like, "Hey, what I want you to do is before the game, spend 15 to 20 minutes visualizing you making saves. That's it. And when you're visualizing you making saves, it helps you in the game." And I couldn't believe how much it helped my game once I started doing that, because things would happen in the game and I was already prepared for it because I had already spent 15 minutes visualizing it before the game. So it just helped me get in the right mindset, the right frame of mind to go and perform and play sports. So I think that as an athlete, I understand how much of a mental grind it can be doing highly competitive sports. And I wasn't even at this level of competition. So I can only imagine on how much more this is a ramped up extreme for sprinters, especially because when you have no margin for error in a 10-second, 11-second race, there's no room for error.
Yeah.
You have
a tenth of a second could be the difference between first and no medal.
Right? You have to be on for the entire race, mentally and physically, and that's what I think makes the 100-meter so intense and so grueling, is because it's so short and it's so fast. It's just boom and it's done.
And one thing that Bromell himself admitted in interviews is that he knew his form wasn't very good. And when I was watching the races, I saw that in both of his races, he was tense, he looked stressed, and contrary to what might seem intuitive, he actually wasn't able to run fast because of those reasons. I really want to share with everyone something that Donovan Bailey said multiple times over the course of CBC's Olympics coverage, that Donovan Bailey pointed out that Trayvon was essentially trying to win every single weekend on the track season. He ran like he was trying to prove a point. He ran like he was trying to just rack up all those victories, and to be sure, he did. But at the same time, you can imagine that takes a very heavy physical toll on you to be able to run that fast every single weekend. It also takes a huge mental toll on you because you are considered the fastest man in the world, and you want to live up to that. And it just seems like Bromell, for whatever reason, maybe he was worn down both physically and mentally. He was not peaking at the right time, and it showed. Whereas Andre DeGrasse, listen, like his numbers in the, if I'm being honest, his numbers in the 100 meters, 200 is a completely different story for him. But the 100 meters is not. It's very good, but it's not great. Like his personal best that he won the bronze medal with is a 9.89. Very good. It's world class, but he's not getting down into that 9.8 flat, 9.7 range that some other guys can. But he clearly peaked at the right time, and Donovan Bailey, obviously the former Canadian Olympic champion, pointed out Andre wasn't trying to win every weekend over the course of the track season. He was using every race as an opportunity to try out different strategies and to refine technical errors in his running, which allowed him to peak at the right time. And coupled with his charming and very lovable ability to not become stressed on the biggest stage in the world. Like, before his races, like he's waving to the crowd, he's throwing up peace signs and everything. Whereas when you looked at Trayvon Bromell, he was very not just stoic, but he looked a bit tense. And I think in the end, it just goes to your point that sports is a mental thing as much as it is a physical thing. And when you are able to relax mentally, it allows your body to maximize physically.
Yeah, I think so. And, that's a really good point that was made by Donovan Bailey there, who said that, DeGrasse used his time to refine his skill. And I think, obviously you go into every competition trying to do well. You're not trying to lose.
Right. You're not trying to mail it in the heats and run 12 seconds.
Right.
In this case.
That's not what you're trying to do. You're constantly pushing yourself. But I think it's important to have that awareness of going, okay, I want to get better. I'm not going to just do the same thing every single time, so that way I can just do repetitively and have kind of the same result, even if that result is first place. I think,
or maybe it's fifth.
Maybe it's fifth, right? But if you're constantly doing the same result, or constantly doing the same thing, you're not growing your game. And I think that a lot of athletes get stuck in this mentality of, I'm going to do the same thing that I've always done. I'm not going to try and grow my game because what is done for me has worked up until this point.
And then people like Ben Simmons finds out it doesn't work, actually.
Exactly, right? And then, once you get to that point where what you have always done has gotten you to the point where you can go no further, all of a sudden, all of your other skills are so far behind that it takes you so much longer to catch up in the long run, so that way you can break through this breaking point. And when athletes spend time trying to develop their game and grow their game in multiple areas, in multiple ways, such as DeGrasse running different techniques, or a basketball player learning different footworks or different shooting strokes or things like that, or a hockey player learning different shots, different dekes, different angles to release the
puck.
puck.
Or to back check more effectively.
Or to, learn defensive schemes even, right? If you try and grow your game from a younger age, you're going to have a better chance of having those breakthroughs later on in your career. And I think that that's what you're talking about here, is that sometimes athletes, they get stuck in the same mentality of doing the same thing over and over again because it's giving them success. And then they eventually hit a wall and they're not able to break through that.
Yeah, and we definitely wish Trayvon Bromell the best of luck at the next international competition. He also is not going to win a relay medal because and another shocker, the United States 4x100 meter relay team failed to advance out of the heats. Despite having Trayvon Bromell led off, Fred Kerley, he won silver in the 100 meters, second leg, Ronnie Baker, who finished fifth in the 100-meter final, and third leg, and they had a less elite, I think, runner, Cravon Gillespie, run the anchor leg. On paper, the U.S. relay team was by far the most dominant and most overpowered in the field. They literally had 3 world-class sprinters, including one in Fred Kerley, who did peak at the right time and won an Olympic silver. But a botched baton handoff between Fred Kerley and Ronnie Baker cost the team precious seconds that ultimately put them, I think, into 4th or 5th place in the heats, behind Canada, by the way, and they did not advance, and that was an absolute shocker.
That's tough. Like, the fact that it's a botched handoff, I think that's really hard, especially for the two that botched the handoff. Like, that's gonna weigh on them. I know it will. Like, they're gonna think about that moment, about that handoff, and go, we practiced the handoff. Like, I remember, in high school, I was on the track and field team. I never did track. I always did field.
Of course, because you're a big boy.
Because I'm a big boy. But I remember, I was always out there practicing with the track and field athletes in high school. And in high school, running track, doing the relays, I remember for the 4x100, 4x200 relays that we ran, it was almost always practicing the handle of the batons. And it was very little to do with running. It was kind of just, all right, we're going to learn how to get this handoff right. and then we're going to learn how to run with it.
Yeah.
And that's something that they teach from you at age 14, right?
Yeah.
So these athletes, it's a mental mistake, it's an error, and it's always hard to see that. And if it costs you a chance at a medal because of that error, it's always tough. I think that with those athletes, I think it would have been disappointing for them not to qualify if they didn't have the baton malfunction.
Oh, immensely so.
But I think this makes it worse.
It does. And again, just to let you know, I mean, I reviewed the stats for that particular heat. And again, this is how razor close sprint events can be, both on the track and in the pool. So Canada essentially came within 1,000th of a second of China in that heat, 37.92 seconds. The United States ran 38.10. That's less than 0.3 of a second difference. And I have to correct myself again. They weren't in 4th or 5th. They were 6th in that heat behind Germany and Ghana. Who has ever heard of the U.S. 4x100 men's relay team losing to Germany or Ghana that many times, right?
Well,
and
Germany had some really good sprinters in the 80s, but there's some questions about some of those that era of sprinting because of PEDs and steroids.
And especially not in recent memory as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you look at the relay handoff, essentially they botched it, and Ronnie Baker ended up putting his hand into Fred Curley's face for a bit, and they fumbled around for a little bit before he actually put the baton in his hand. And there we go, less than 0.3 of a second difference. But it's a sprint event. That's all you need to drop out of a qualifying spot. And again, very, very, very shocking. Equally shocking, but in a good way, and let's talk again about breaking barriers. Andre DeGrasse, 19.62 seconds, Canadian record, 200 meters, gold medal. Guys, this is the first time, as I'm sure many of you have heard, since 1928 that a Canadian man has won Olympic gold in the 200 meters. And it's the first time since 1996 that a Canadian man has won Olympic gold in any sprinting
Was
event,
that Donovan Bailey?
Which was Donovan in 1996. And we were talking about this on the trip here, Tyson. Andre DeGrasse is not the fastest starter. He probably wouldn't be great at something like the 40-yard dash, but his high-end speed endurance and his top speed is absolutely phenomenal, and it really shines in the 200 meters.
Yeah, I think when you watched him out of the 100 meter, you could kind of see like his start wasn't as good as a lot of the other athletes there, but he was able to catch up to a lot of the athletes in the last 50 meters or so and chase down some people and kind of finish third place.
If you give him 25 more meters, he might have won that race.
He might have, and you don't know that, right? Yeah. But with Andre DeGrasse, I think he's kind of like Usain Bolt, for example, always did this, and I'm not comparing Bolt to DeGrasse because there's a massive size difference. But what Usain Bolt always had is he was extremely long-legged, so that means he always did well in the back half of the race, but he had some trouble getting out of the gates. That's kind of the same situation when I watch Andre DeGrasse, is that he doesn't always have the best start, even though he's 5'10", kind of a smaller frame than a lot of like tall, lanky sprinters. But DeGrasse, he's able to hold that speed that he has at top speed, and he's able to carry it through the 100 meters, I think better than anyone. And because of that, it translates so well to the 200 meters because he's able to reach that top speed and stay at that top speed for longer. And that's what's separating him from going, from being a good to great athlete in the 200 sprint, is that his ability to stay at top speed for longer.
During his gold medal winning race, the CBC analysis team, commentary team, pointed out to us viewers that Andre DeGrasse in that race held his top speed for 180 out of 200 meters, which, if you don't know track, that's insane.
That's absolutely insane.
That's just most human beings don't work that way. You can hit your top speed, but even most of the best in the world, the lactic acid buildup just takes over, and your muscles start to weaken, and you can't maintain that speed. And in a lot of sprint events, even in sprint events, it's actually about who can slow down the least. And the reason why Andre DeGrasse, he was in about 5th place at the turn, and he just hunted down two world-class athletes in Noah Lyles and Kenny Bednarek. Noah Lyles, this year's, again, fastest man in the world at 200 meters, a 19.50 personal best, but he wasn't able to run it on that particular night. Andre hunted him down and hunted down Kenny Bednarek, the other American ace, and he crushed them over the last 100 meters. And it was because he was able to maintain his speed longer than everybody else. And this goes to my point about relaxing. Yeah, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. That's not a very long time at all. However, it is definitely enough time for an athlete to win or lose themselves the race. And Andre was mentally relaxed. He was very confident. And when he, especially in the 200s, he hits that bend, he knows his high-end speed is there, and he was able to execute, and he slows down less than everybody else. And the rest is literally history. And I'm going to put the athletic analysis aside for a brief moment to say, this morning when I watched that medal ceremony, and to see a Canadian on top of the podium, not just in, some niche event like race walking or steeplechase, but in a marquee Olympic event like the men's 200 meters, and to hear our national anthem play, goosebumps, man. It was awesome.
Yeah, that's super cool. Also, just want to mention, this is the first year that surfing was an Olympic sport, and I think that's super cool. And I just have a quick story that I remembered that I wanted to share about it. In the women's final, the lady who won it was actually one of the indigenous peoples from Hawaii.
Wow.
So she was able to win gold, and it's really interesting because she started off surfing, but not on an actual surfboard. She was using she was making her own surfboards out of stuff that she had found around her local community, and she was surfing on not actual surfboards. So it's incredible to see that's where she got her start. And surfing is a very local indigenous culture thing that is very important to them. So I think that's super cool that she was able to do well at the Olympics, first time ever that it's been an Olympic sport.
Certainly that is the case. And again, especially with the tragedies that have taken place throughout history involving indigenous peoples from a lot of different places, I'm proud to be Canadian, but especially this whole residential school legacy and stuff like that. It's absolutely horrible, and I'm glad that it's at least coming to light so that we can acknowledge these atrocities and do our best to pursue reconciliation and closure for them. But I also think that sport has the power to, in some small way, begin to address these types of things. And again, even though I know that it's not Canadian indigenous, but still, a native Hawaiian woman coming out and just showing her stuff on the biggest stage in the world and winning a gold medal is definitely something that I can think I think we can all feel really good about. And so I thank you for sharing that story.
Her name is Carissa Moore.
She's going to be a hero on those islands now, if she wasn't already.
She's a member of the Surfers Hall of Fame, so she's definitely been, kind of in that extremely competitive field out there in Hawaii. But that's great that she was able to do it on the Olympic stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for her. And last thing about the Olympics, at least for now, is another clutch performance on the biggest stage. We're talking, of course, about decathlete Damian Warner of Ontario, who earlier today became the fourth man in history to score 9,000 plus points in a decathlon. And if you don't know how a decathlon works, and also the women's equivalent, the heptathlon, basically you have to be the most well-rounded athlete, over 7 if it's the heptathlon, 10 events if it's the decathlon. And how it works is that you're not racing necessarily your opponents, even though, well, you are, but you're trying to put out the best performance possible in every event, and there's a very complicated system where, depending on where you finish, you will score different amounts of points in every single event. For example, if you run the 100 meters in 10.6 seconds, there's a established system that says you will get X number of points for that. But if you run it in 10.3, you'll get more points. And likewise, in the javelin throw, if you throw it 44 meters, you're going to get X number of points. But if you throw it 47 meters, you're going to get more points. And if you throw it, obviously, the more is the better. And so this whole point thing is an indication of how well-rounded these decathletes and heptathletes are, and that is, of course, how we crown what is considered by many to be the world's best athlete overall. And so the fact that Damian Warner, he didn't just win the gold medal. Like, another gold medal for Canada, I'm stoked about that. I'm over the moon. Mm-hmm. But for him to break that 9,000 point barrier, which, by the way, is a new Olympic record, I believe, and it just means, though, that not only did Damian win gold, not only was he the best in the world this year, he scored historically well-rounded numbers in each of his 10 events, and that's just otherworldly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's super awesome to see Damian Warner really put it all together in kind of the way that he did here at Tokyo. Like, he tied his best time in the 100 meters, so like that's something that he definitely was on his game this Olympics, which is super great. He's 31 years old. He's been doing this for many, many years.
Bronze medal 5 years ago in Rio.
Yeah, and he's 31. He's going to be 34-ish around the time that he gets to the next Olympics. This was probably one of his last best chances to win gold. And, he was competing against guys that were much younger than him, and he was just able to put it all together. And that's something that's so great. Like you said, only 4 people have hit the 9,000 point mark for a decathlon performance. And Damian did it. And that's something that's super impressive, especially at the world stage. So, yeah, what a great showing. What a great opportunity for him, and a London, Ontario native. And he was able to really showcase the strength and endurance that he has as a true athlete. And yeah, we're just proud of him.
Certainly we are. And just to finish making this point, the decathlon includes a ridiculous plethora of events that test different aspects of your skill set. Everything from the 100 meters to the 1,500 meters, discus, shot put, javelin, high jump, pole vault, 110-meter hurdles. It's absolutely bananas how well-rounded you have to be remotely competitive at this. And on top of that, it's a grueling 2-day event where Damian and his competitors this week, each day they were out at the track with their first event beginning at 9 in the morning. At 9 in the morning, it was already 40+ degrees Celsius in Tokyo. It's ludicrously hot.
Oh.
And their final event, both days, went at 10 p.m. at night.
Oh.
And so not only do you have to do all these super different events that test your skill set in every conceivable way, you have to do it for 12 hours more?
Well, I'm sure you're not running
12, 13 hours a day. And obviously they get breaks and refreshments and conditioning breaks in between, but nonetheless, just that with that blazing heat, and it's that mental test of, okay, I did all these events and now I have to do these later on in the day. I get a bit of a break, yeah, but 40+ degrees Celsius and just the length of time over 2 days, very, very intensive, and let's be real. All of that work for a chance at just one medal, you have to love sport to do that.
Oh man, that's so much work for one medal. I can't believe it. That's just so much training, so much work, and I can't believe that this is even an event just because it's so intense and so grueling to do a decathlon. Think about the peak physical shape you have to be in to get to the point that Damian Warner is at and just maintain it for multiple Olympics, and that's just something that is so incredible, and I can't be more proud of. That's something that's so special. I can't even begin to think about how his body is in peak physical condition.
I feel like a decathlete is as close to Captain America as we're ever gonna get in real life. And of course, a quick shout out to fellow Canadian Pierce Lepage, who finished 5th in the decathlon in his first kick at the Olympic can. Very, very solid effort from him. Also, interesting factoid, when Damian won bronze in 2016, he finished behind American Ashton Eaton, who was in the top of the world back when he was competing. And Damian Warner leapfrogged Kevin Mayer for first on the podium. Kevin finished second. again. So that's just kind of cool how that played out.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Now, with that being said, as you know, Tyson, I could talk about the Olympics for literally days, but we do have a good amount of other material to bring to you folks. And again, in true relay sprinter fashion, let's not botch the handoff, and I'm going to throw it over to you for what we got next.
Yeah, so we got the NHL coming up next. So we had some business in the NHL. We here on the Draft Board podcast, we like to talk about the drafts. And in the NHL, we had 2. So we get 2 whole drafts, and we're going to talk about the Seattle Kraken draft that happened first. So just because that's what happened chronologically, and I think it's a good way to kind of set up how it happened. So for those of you who may not have watched, Seattle Kraken hosted their own kind of outdoor event in Seattle. It was, a great opportunity for fans to get acquainted with their new team members. They took some interesting players. They had some interesting choices, which we can now talk about now. But yeah, it's just an opportunity for the newest expansion franchise to come into the NHL, to have a chance to make a spectacle.
I personally can't wait for the crackheads to file into the crack house for the inaugural season of the Seattle Kraken. And you know what? From my point of view, this is just another team that I can root for over Vancouver. So I am all about that.
Oh, man, there's already going for the geographical rivalry between Seattle and Vancouver. First home game for Seattle, it's against Vancouver. So, it's going to be probably a win for Seattle in that. No, I'm just kidding.
But, you know what? If Seattle sweeps the season series against Vancouver, I will laugh so hard and I'll be quite happy.
Yes. It's an interesting kind of dynamic that the Kraken are going to find themselves in. A lot of people are thinking that the Pacific Division is going to be particularly weak. They don't expect the Ducks or the Sharks to make any noise in the playoffs anywhere.
And I mean, to be fair, those are both old teams that I think their windows have closed. Yeah. It's really too bad, but their big guns are old now, and they're just not who they used to be, and they don't seem... I don't think they have a great deal coming down the pipeline, at least in the next few years. So we'll see.
And you got, Vegas is the powerhouse in the Pacific right now. Arizona has moved over to the Central. But the Canadian teams of Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary have a lot of question marks, to say the least, about kind of what their playoffs hopes are going to look like. So a lot of people are giving the Kraken, after this draft, a legitimate shot at making the playoffs. Sure.
And so why don't we actually start with Jamie Alexiak?
Okay.
It always, I think it's a good transition since we gave his sister so much love. But look, Jamie Alexiak, 6'7", 255 pounds. He's those are NFL tight end measurables. He's a juggernaut. He's very strong, very big, and he definitely has the physical tools needed to be a dominant defender in the NHL. He was a top 4, top 6 guy with the Dallas Stars during their Cup final run last year, where they lost to none other than the incredibly overpowered Tampa Bay Lightning. So I think that, if you can be a regular starting player on a Stanley Cup final making team, that shows that, your career has advanced to another level. And I feel really good for him. He's honestly a guy that when I was playing, EA Sports NHL games in the past, I love to edit all the player ratings for fun. And he's a guy that I always buffed in terms of his physical traits, because it's just the idea of a player who's that big and that strong. You want that guy to be able to make the most out of his physical gifts. And, I think at least in theory, he brings size, strength, and playoff experience to the Seattle Kraken, and I think he should, in all likelihood, be an asset.
Yeah, no, he definitely will. Here's my thing about the Seattle Kraken as a whole, and it applies here to Jamie Alexiak, is that what the Kraken did, which I think was really interesting and weird, is they took a lot of unrestricted free agents and then signed...
Oh, and Alexiak being one of them, yes.
Alexiak being one of them, and signed them after the expansion draft, which I guess kind of makes sense a little bit, but not really. For me, personally, it would make way more sense to draft another player who is under contract with the Dallas Stars and go to Jamie Alexiak in free agency and say, hey, Jamie Alexiak, we're really interested in you. Do you want to sign with us, and here's a contract to play for the Kraken.
And as you said earlier, he did end up signing a fairly sizable $20+ million contract anyway, which implies that they had a realistic shot of getting him in free agency.
Right, and they did this with Adam Larsson, who was a UFA who they picked from Edmonton. They did this with Chris Driedger, who was a goalie who they picked from Florida.
Shout out Calgary Hitmen.
Shout out Calgary Hitmen. And, they did this with a number of other players. And I just think that it's interesting that they went after unrestricted free agents and tried to sign them. Like, there were a couple of free agents who they drafted that weren't signed, and they ended up going to another team. For example, John Quenneville of the Chicago Blackhawks. He was a UFA. Gavin Bayreuther from Columbus. He was drafted by the Kraken in the expansion draft. He wasn't signed, and then he went to unrestricted free agency and signed back with Columbus. So to me, it kind of seemed in that situation like it was a little bit of a waste of a pick. I don't understand quite what they were doing. I guess if the Kraken wanted that guy and they wanted him bad enough, and you go out and you get him and you sign him, I guess they're happy with that. But to me, in an expansion draft that was, in my opinion, as lenient as this one was, like, for example, this expansion draft, you protected 7 forwards, 3D, and a goalie, or 8 players and a goalie, one of those two options. In previous years, you could protect 9 forwards and 4D and a goalie. Like, that's the situation. That's what Columbus and the Minnesota Wild had to deal with. So the expansion process was more lenient for Vegas and Seattle this time around than it was in previous expansion drafts. So it seemed like Seattle had the opportunity to kind of grab a hold of the reins, grab the NHL by the jugular vein, and really take advantage of a lot of situations that teams were in, and they didn't do it. And that's what frustrates me, is that they had the opportunity to capitalize on such an opportunity, and they didn't take it, and that just kind of leaves me a little bit disappointed.
I think I would agree with that analysis, and also, with someone like Adam Larsson, in theory, he's a very solid top 4 defenseman, but I think over the last couple of seasons in Edmonton, particularly in the playoffs, I don't think he was who they needed him to be. Certainly, listen, if he was, Darnell Nurse wouldn't have played a 4.5-minute shift against the Winnipeg Jets in overtime. And so if you're going to pick him as an unrestricted free agent and then have to throw money at him, it just begs the question, like you said, couldn't you have gone after him in free agency anyways? With that being said, I just wanted to give a quick shout out also to Calgary Flames former captain Mark Giordano. As a Flames fan, I obviously really like that player. I think he was really a late blooming success story that came from inauspicious beginnings, but late in the back half of his career established himself as a top defenseman in the NHL, a versatile, smart player who could do it all. And having said that, though, at 37 years old with a $6.75 million per year contract, the end was near, and I think it was definitely very logical and unsurprising that the Flames exposed him. And the thing is, though, I want to get your thoughts on this, because it seemed like the Seattle Kraken, when they did pick guys that weren't UFAs and that were on a contract, everyone that they got that wasn't like cheap, like under $3-4 million a year, were kind of like these old guys, like Mark Giordano. And whereas, it begs the question, if you had managed your cap a little bit differently, could they have gotten Gabriel Landeskog, who was available, if you tried to find a way to save the cap somewhere else? And surely Gabriel Landeskog, as an excellent power forward and proven leader in his prime, who Colorado simply couldn't or chose not to protect. Gabriel Landeskog's only 28. And for me, yeah, sure, he would have warranted a big, probably $10 million salary, but I question just a little bit the idea of taking someone like Giordano. All due respect to him, but he's so old that that the end is near for him. Since the pardon me, the Seattle Kraken took so many cheap players. Like, for example, John Quenneville, you mentioned, $750K. Jeremy Lauzon, who was pressed into a top 6 role for the Boston Bruins, $850K on defense. A guy like Calle Jarnkrok, or as Marshawn Lynch called him, boy Calle, in the very... If you just look this up on YouTube or TikTok if you don't know what we're talking about, it's hilarious. Marshawn Lynch is hilarious. Yeah, Calle Jarnkrok, $2 million. Yeah, to me it was very interesting. Again, like, I understanding that we don't necessarily have the full picture that the GMs do, but yeah, I thought it was interesting how they seem to be going for a lot of cheap youth with potential, and yet when they actually picked guys who were on contract who had big contracts, it wasn't really who you expected.
Yeah, I mean, like, I agree. I don't really know kind of what Seattle's kind of looking for this season. I think it's so up in the air what the season could look like for Seattle. Like, it's such a random gong show after what happened with Vegas, but like, it seemed like to me that Seattle was very conservative in their picking of players, and I wanted them to be more aggressive. I wanted them to go after some bigger players, some bigger names. But they chose not to do so. And I think that the best way you can explain this is what Ron Francis said 2 weeks before the expansion draft. And he came out in a press conference and he said, "We at Seattle value cap space as the most important thing in this league." And I think that kind of just shows a little bit about how the NHL has evolved and changed a little bit into becoming a little bit more like the NBA, where you want to have cap space to be able to sign free agents or cap space to be able to sign players you draft and keep those players around, in that cap space can be used monetarily like never before. Like, for example, we can discuss this next time, is the Arizona Coyotes have made many trades where they're taking on some bad contracts to get draft picks, so that way they can use their cap space in a way that, allows them to get some draft picks, high draft picks that they can use and get young players for them to be better in the future. I think that what Seattle did is they didn't really do either. It was reported that the Seattle Kraken were charging a first-round pick and a third-round pick in order for you to have an extra protection slot for your player.
Okay.
So what happens is, like, the Seattle Kraken go and they say, "We're going to select this player. If you want for us to not select this player, you need to pay us a first and a third." That was what was reported. No team paid that price. And the Seattle Kraken still came out with this roster. I think about it and I go, there are some better players, some more valuable players that you could have taken and then traded away if you wanted to.
Right, or like you said, it kind of sounds like they could have also squeezed teams for draft capital by threatening to pick certain guys that were of value to other teams as well.
Right, and like, for example, like the thing with the Carolina pick is they really liked Morgan Geekie, who's a 23-year-old young center. He looks like he has a lot of potential. But there was also Jake Bean, who looked like he was going to be a very good defenseman in Carolina. He's kind of buried on the depth chart there. But they could have got him, and then if they wanted a draft pick, they could have traded him to Columbus for a second-round pick, because that's what Carolina did.
Yeah.
So, and like the same thing with Nikita Zadorov. They drafted John Quenneville out of Chicago only for John Quenneville to be, let go and go back into unrestricted free agency, when they could have drafted Nikita Zadorov and then traded him for a draft pick like what Chicago did. It seemed like, to me, they didn't value certain players. And I think that, for me personally, I think they kind of valued some of the wrong areas.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you folks, given my very busy job working at camp this summer, and also the fact that I've been focusing exclusively on the Olympics, I don't necessarily have the full picture, but at a glance, I would agree with what you said, Tyson. I did want to point out that I think Yanni Gourde from the Tampa Bay Lightning was a very, very solid pick.
Very good pick.
And the fact that he was available, I mean, Tampa Bay is so overpowered and so deep that there was no way that they could have protected and re-signed everybody, and losing Yanni Gourde's a decent blow, but I think that's one that was more of a slam dunk for the Seattle Kraken. They took him. I think he's going to be a very good player for them. Let's talk now about what happened between Seattle and the Montreal Canadiens, because as many hockey fans know, Montreal raised a lot of eyebrows by exposing all-world goaltender Carey Price in the expansion draft, because they thought, and they pretty much knew they were going to lose their backup goalie Jake Allen if they had exposed him, so they decided to gamble that Seattle would pass on Price because of his age and his contract, so that they could end up keeping both Price and Jake Allen. Now, notwithstanding the fact that Montreal's playoff window would have slammed shut if Seattle had called their bluff and picked Carey Price, Seattle, like you said, they didn't do that. They didn't really put the screws to them at all. Instead, they picked a guy named Cale Fleury, and I know you have some thoughts about that pick.
Yeah, like Cale Fleury, he's a young defenseman. He's got some promise. He played pretty well, as a prospect. But like for me, like it seems like the Seattle Kraken didn't want to hold any teams to the jugular. I think what they did, and this is just a theory, okay, is they saw Vegas, and they're seeing what Vegas is doing with their team, and we'll get into this, but like they're trading away players who they just acquired a year or 2 years ago. And, some of their core players like Marc-Andre Fleury got traded for almost nothing. A lot of the franchises in the NHL are very upset with Vegas, and they don't want to make trades with Vegas, and Vegas is kind of in this position where a lot of the organizations in the NHL have resentment against them.
Right.
Because of how they've operated. And, I mean, credits to Vegas. They're a good team. They're a quality. They have a very good product on the ice, but a lot of people are very upset about how good Vegas was in year one in the NHL in terms of league executives. And, the fact that they almost drafted a Stanley Cup winning championship team
oh my goodness,
out of the expansion draft is unheard of. But, I think what Seattle is doing is they're looking at Vegas and they're going, they are so hated around the league that it's actually going to start producing more problems for them.
Oh, because they did end up putting the screws to a lot of teams.
Yes.
And by pursuing cutthroat trades and drafting more aggressively, you mean?
Exactly. And I think that the Kraken said, no, we're going to go more conservative. We're going to play the long game, and we're going to try and be everybody's best friend and maybe not try and put the screws to you. So I think that that's something that was definitely talked about in Seattle. I don't know if it's true, but that's what I think, and it's at least a theory that I have, right? So, when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens, Ron Francis and the Kraken absolutely could have screwed them. But I guess, again, they valued youth, they valued age, and they valued the potential rather than kind of the high-priced Carey Price, which, I mean, I don't think that I would run an organization the way that they did, but this is the choice that they made. This is the decision, Carey Price's wife came out and said, man, I was almost sure that we were going to move to Seattle. I was almost sure of it. And the fact that they were even considering it, it surprises me that the Kraken didn't take more advantage of the situation that they were given in.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess Bergevin, he saw right through Ron Francis, and he said, you're not going to want to take a $10.5 million contract. So we're not gonna protect him. You can have him if you want him, and we're gonna protect Jake Allen. So
well, it was a heck of a play, and for Montreal, it definitely paid off. But the other pick that stood out to me, and I'm not entirely for negative reasons though, is who Seattle took from the St. Louis Blues. They took Vince Dunn, who has had injury problems recently, but he was if memory serves, he was definitely a key top four defender during the St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup winning run in 2019. He's a mobile two-way defender who's versatile, and he's certainly a good player with the potential to get better for sure. What caught my attention is that Vladimir Tarasenko was also available, and Tarasenko is a former 40-goal scorer I would say definitely the talent to score 50 if he stayed healthy and things went right for him. 6 feet tall, 225 pounds. He's a tank. He's on the right side of 30 at 29 years of age. And I think we were talking about this earlier. Because of St. Louis Blues, I think, what was it? They misdiagnosed his injury or something like that. And it created a rift between Vladimir and his team, and that was a key reason why he was left unprotected. And granted, I think Vince Dunn was a pretty good pick. 24-year-old two-way defenseman, top four capable with the potential to get better. That's not at all a bad pick. That's none too shabby. At the same time, though, I'm just thinking, okay, Tarasenko also has had injury issues in recent years. He has not been able to recapture his old 40-plus goal form. Still, though, I think it's an interesting talking point. I want to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, I think definitely Vince Dunn is one of those guys that has the possibility to really rise to the occasion in a bigger role. He was kind of buried on the depth chart in St. Louis during that cup run behind Pietrangelo,
Bouwmeester,
and Parayko. He was kind of buried on the depth chart and wasn't giving many opportunities. Plus, he's young, he's a good defenseman, he's 24. He's going to be able to have an opportunity to play top 4, possibly even top 2 minutes in Seattle. And I think that this is one of those situations where maybe the Kraken are thinking that Vince Dunn can kind of turn into their Shea Theodore, where maybe this is a guy they take in the expansion draft and he can be a core defenseman for them for 10 years or 5 years. But I kind of agree with you. I really think that Tarasenko, yes, he's got shoulder surgeries and he's dealing with that and he's hurt. And because of everything that happened in St. Louis, it's a mutual agreement that they both want out of this deal. They both want to trade. They both want to have a different scenery. But, I think that because Tarasenko has such an ability to score, I think that he's going to be in high demand. Well, he was in high demand before the expansion draft because he hasn't been traded yet, and a lot of teams don't have cap space. That market has softened, kind of the way that Jack Eichel's trade market also has been softened because not many people now can afford his cap hit. So because of that, I think that, Tarasenko, he's not looking like he's going to be traded very soon, and it's going to be tough for him to find a new spot outside of St. Louis. But I think that the Kraken could have taken him, could have traded him for a lot of value. Edmonton was rumored to be interested in Tarasenko, a good scoring right winger to play in their top 6, either with Draisaitl or McDavid.
I mean, that could be truly explosive. In the regular season, at least, we all know Edmonton needs a lot of depth to go anywhere in the playoffs. But yes, I think they're also the kind of team who would really want that kind of firepower.
Well, would you rather have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Zach Hyman, or would you rather have Vladimir Tarasenko and $2.5 million in cap space?
I mean, I'd rather have Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux. That's neither here nor there. No, I take your point for sure. And so, yeah, I think overall I would, based on what I have seen and what I do know, I would agree with your assessment. It seems like the Kraken were not as aggressive as they could have been. Granted, what we're going to talk about in next episode is the series of, I would say, coups that they managed to pull off in free agency so far, which really has beefed up this roster. But we're going to save that for next time. So did you have any more thoughts on the Kraken, or did you want to move on to the other NHL draft?
Just one more thought. A lot of what they took was definitely, on defense at least, was size. Jamie Alexiak, 6'7", 255. He's a big boy. Adam Larson, 6'3", 230. He's a big boy. They took some really big
and even,
players.
Dunn's about 6 foot, 200, 205, pretty solid. Mark Giordano, 6 feet, around 200. Not huge, but quite solid. And definitely both Dunn and Giordano are capable of playing physical as well.
Yeah, like Hayden Fleury, 6'3". They took some size on defense, and they went a little bit smaller.
And they didn't go with 6'2" Sabonis, in the words of the great Charles Barkley.
Charles Barkley. No, they went big on defense and a little bit smaller on forwards. Yanni Gourde, 5'9". Jordan Eberle is only 5'11", I think.
Jordan Eberle definitely more of a finesse player. I mean, Brandon Tanev is very physical, but he's about 6'1", 180.
Yeah.
He'll be a key fourth liner, and Calle Yarncroke's not overly big either, so on and so forth.
Right, and they took like Carson Soucy from Minnesota.
Jonas Donskoy, 6 feet, about maybe 190. Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
So they got some size on the back end, and that's something that they absolutely valued. But no, let's transition to the NHL draft.
And the guy that most people thought would go number 1 overall ended up doing so, even though he said he was going to go back to Michigan for the Michigan Wolverines for another year. That obviously didn't end up happening, I think.
No, I
Owen
think...
Power, the 6'6" defenseman, highly touted, did go number 1 overall, which that to the Buffalo Sabres, as we know, but that came as a surprise to not very many people.
Yeah, so Owen Power, he was part of the World Hockey Championship Team Canada team that won gold at the World Hockey Championship. He's a very good he really grew during that tournament. He was kind of a fringe defenseman, not getting many minutes, but near the end of the tournament, the coach was really, Gerard Gallant was really putting him in some important positions. And just an overall theme with this draft is you saw a lot of Americans getting drafted in this draft, and this is one of the effects of the pandemic. Just because of the pandemic and just because Canada didn't play many hockey games this year because we were locked down. It was extremely hard for the NHL to get going in Canada. It was even more difficult for the junior leagues to get going. So, for example, Mason McTavish, he was drafted 3rd, but he actually didn't play any games in the OHL out of Peterborough. He went to the Swiss League, which, fun fact, I think he was actually born in Switzerland. So he was kind of familiar with that environment, but he goes back over to Switzerland and he plays hockey games over in Europe because he's a highly touted prospect. He can go over there and play, and he can play games because the OHL wasn't going to play any hockey this year. Owen Power, Matthew Beniers, Kent Johnson, they were all University of Michigan hockey players. And, Luke Hughes, National Development Program.
Brother of Vancouver Canucks standout Quinn Hughes, and New Jersey's golden boy Jack Hughes, of course.
Right. The first brothers ever to go top 7 in 3 drafts. Very impressive for the Hughes family. Luke obviously joining his brother Jack in New Jersey. Luke Hughes, he's in the National Development Program for the U.S. He's going to be going to the University of Michigan this upcoming year. So a lot of Americans got drafted early and often throughout this whole process, and a lot of Canadians in the OHL went to Europe. Like, for example, Brant Clark, he's a defenseman who was taken by Los Angeles 8th overall. He actually went and played in the Czech League because, he needed to play games, and that was the only league that he could find that would be interested in him playing games this year. So for a lot of Canadian players, it was really tough for them to kind of get going, get into the league, get playing games for this season. And as you can see kind of later on in the first round, some of the Canadian players who had really good years the year before as 16, 17-year-olds, they started getting drafted in the late round, like 20 to 32 is kind of when they started getting drafted. The Stars drafted a guy's name is Wyatt Johnson. He was ranked in the 4th round by Central Scouting simply because he didn't play hockey this year. He had 6 games in the U18 championship for Canada, kind of as a depth player, 3rd liner, but he actually got to play those games. But other than that tournament, he didn't play anywhere this year because he couldn't find a spot over in Europe. He was hoping the OHL would get going.
And it did not.
And it did not. And, he never got the opportunity to play. The Quebec League, they had their problems with COVID. They got started, they had to get shut down, and they eventually didn't finish. The WHL got started very late. They got started well after the NHL, and they only played about 16, 20 games or so. So it was really hard for scouts to be, clear and concise on a lot of these rankings. You could kind of tell by the top 8 or so, who was going where and stuff like that. But a lot of players after that, completely random.
Yeah, but having said that, why don't we talk about at least a few of the top picks?
Sure.
Owen Power, he's got all the measurables, he's got the reputation behind him, right? Young guy, 6'5", but at 214 pounds, he's not a stick. He has not just the height, but the size to handle himself quite well in the NHL. According to the Hockey News, they think that he could pan out as well as approaching someone like Victor Hedman if he's able to put it together at the NHL level. What do you think his chances are?
It's Buffalo, so you never know.
Oh, yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
However,
I think it's really good that he's going to be going back to Michigan. I don't trust Buffalo to develop their players. I'm so sad that Rasmus
Ristolainen?
No, not Rasmus Dahlin.
Ah, yes.
I'm really sad that he came over when he did, and he's been playing in Buffalo, and his development has been taking a hit because he's been playing in such a tough situation in Buffalo. I'm afraid that he's not going to be what he could have been because he's not being developed the proper way in Buffalo. And that makes me really sad. So I think it's good for Owen Power to not play in Buffalo this year because Buffalo's going to be bad. He's not going to play.
And Jack Eichel still wants to leave.
Right. He's going to go back to Michigan. He's going to continue to develop. He's going to go back. He's going to get a full year of university, which he missed because he was doing online classes all year. So I think that it would be best for Owen Power to go back to Michigan. I think that he has a good chance to be a top 4 defenseman in this league just because of his size and his skating. Anything past that, I'm not sure. I don't think that he's going to be as good as Hedman. I really don't. I think that...
Well, which, I mean, that's a very tough ask.
Right.
Hedman almost generationally good.
Almost generationally good, Norris winner. That's a lot to put on... That's a lot to put on Owen Power. He's definitely got some size and skill. Could he be a top 2 defenseman? Maybe. Could he be...
I think if he develops well.
I think if he develops well, he has the potential to be a good first-line defenseman. I don't particularly think that he's going to put up a lot of points. I think he's going to be around a 40-point pro as a defenseman who's going to be very good defensively, good PK,
good size.
Good size. He can play on your second power play unit. He's going to be a good two-way defenseman who's not going to be particularly great offensively, but he's not going to burn you defensively either. So that's kind of where I project Owen Power to be. But just because this year in this draft, I think it's a little bit of a weaker draft than usual. So I think that plays a part in it as well.
I would agree with that. I think that's a sensible analysis. And I personally am fairly frustrated by the media's tendency to... I mean, I say this as a sports journalist. I mean, I'm around this all the time. But look, the media overhypes a lot of these young men, right, coming out of college or coming out of junior leagues because, and I mean, I think the media obviously has their reasons for doing that, and fans, they have their reasons for doing that. Everyone loves to ask the question, what if, and everyone loves to get excited about what appears to be young talent with a lot of potential, but, I think that, to ask questions like, who's going to be the next Connor McDavid? Whoa. If that happened every few years, Connor McDavid wouldn't be special.
Right.
But Connor McDavid is obviously very special. Like Sidney Crosby, very special. Like Ovechkin, Stamkos, all these guys, right? So, yeah, which is why I kind of like how, I have this magazine, draft preview magazine from the Hockey News in front of me. Mm-hmm. And the way they phrase it is not a direct comparison, but best case scenarios. And so Owen Power was compared to Victor Hedman in that light, in their big top prospect breakdown. I think that's right. I think that's reasonable, right? And I think it's something that people should resist the urge to do, because it's like, and even with someone like McDavid, like, oh, is he going to be, better than Sidney Crosby? Well, hold on. Sidney Crosby has been in the league how many years? Connor McDavid has been in the league how many years? Right? Like, Connor McDavid is a phenomenal talent, and unlike these draft picks, he's already proven at the NHL level. Still, he's less than 25 years old, and all manner of things could happen to him over the course of his career, right? Maybe he will be, as long-lived and as productive, or even more so than Sidney Crosby. Or maybe he suffers a major injury. I mean, Edmonton fans are praying this never happens, but maybe he suffers a major injury and isn't able to come back as well as Crosby did from his concussions. Or maybe he'll hit 32 and his speed's going to go and he won't be as effective because speed is one of his greatest weapons. Guys, we just don't know for sure. And so I think that across all sports, it's always fun to be is Trevor Lawrence going to be the next I don't know, Aaron Rodgers or whatever, but I think it's ultimately more sensible and more fair to these young men to try to evaluate them based on their own merits and draw comparisons to NHL stars by way of describing their skill set, but not in the sense of is he going to be as good as a proven Norris winner or Hart winner or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You know, it's tough to always think about like projections, and that's something that we like to do, but we got to remember these are just kids. They've got a long way to get into the NHL and a long way for their career to take place.
Yeah, and what about your thoughts on Matty Beniers, the second overall pick that went to the Seattle Kraken? I bring him up because we've been talking a lot about the Kraken and sort of their interesting draft selections. But he is a center. He's not big, but he projects to be a very skilled, smart, two-way guy. According to the Hockey News, his best case comparison is Jonathan Toews, and that is, if he's anywhere near Jonathan Toews, the Kraken pick themselves a gem. So what do you think they have in him?
This is my opinion. I think Owen Power is more of the sure thing in this draft. I think Matty Beniers has the potential to be the best player in this draft.
So high ceiling.
High ceiling. I think that he's going to be a top 6 player. I think that he has a chance to be a top 6 center. But I think that because he has all of the tools that he has to be what he can be, I think he has a chance to be almost like a Patrice Bergeron, or kind of like a really good defensively minded center, but also was very good offensively. This kid, he was draft eligible, but he was playing for the World Junior Championships for the U.S. and they won gold at the World Juniors. So he's proven that he can take a role on a team that they need to win. He played in the World Championships here for the United States. They won bronze at the World Championships, and he was playing with guys like Dylan Larkin. So I think like Matty Beniers, he can be a really good pick here for Seattle. If I was Buffalo, I would have thought about taking Matty Beniers just because you've traded Reinhart, you're gonna probably trade Eichel, you need some center depth, and where you find top centers is within the first few picks of the draft. And I think that with Buffalo, they need to replenish that center depth. And I think the best place you can find one is maybe in Matty Beniers. But they chose the defenseman. They chose Owen Power. And I don't think that's going to be a bad pick. But I would have seriously considered Matty Beniers first overall if I was Buffalo.
Yeah, I think you make a good argument there, especially with the specter of Jack Eichel and the fact that he probably isn't going to be there long term. Yeah, and also, if memory serves, Reinhart left as well. I think you might have said that.
He was traded to Florida.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think Owen Power is well. First of all, you know me, I love measurables, and Owen Power looks like a darn good prospect. Matty Beniers, has potential as well, and I think Seattle is obviously banking on that, and they, we wish him the best of luck. Now, the last major thing that I wanted to bring up in the draft, because it was a draft choice, and that's why I think we should talk about it in this episode, is at the bottom of the first round, 31st overall, Logan Mailloux. I think that's how you say his name. He was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens. Tyson, why is this a big deal?
Yeah, so, okay, this 31st and 32nd pick is probably the worst 10 to 15 minutes in the National Hockey League in recent memory. Like the worst 10 minutes in history in recent memory. For those of you who don't know, is we have Logan Mailloux being drafted, but also there's a sexual assault allegation against the Blackhawks. And just based off of how the Blackhawks presented their 32nd pick, it seemed very insensitive. It seemed like it was a spectacle. Elliot Friedman on his podcast, the 31 Thoughts, the podcast, he said that it seemed like it was inauthentic. And it was really sad for him, going through that and watching this and going, oh, this is just a show to make themselves look good in front of the NHL because of all of these allegations that are coming out against the organization. And that happened right after this pick of Logan Mailloux. Now, what happened with Logan is that he was a top player in the OHL. He was playing for the London Knights, and he got the opportunity to go over and play in Sweden. So he was over and playing in Sweden. And what happened with Logan is while he was there, he had a consensual sexual encounter with a woman. He took pictures of that encounter without consent, and then distributed those pictures to his teammates on Snapchat.
That's awful stuff.
Yeah. And he went through the legal process in Sweden. I think he was fined for it. He wasn't suspended. But this came out, and it kind of recognizes and realizes that this is a serious situation. This is a sex crime that is not okay. And this is definitely something that I think is very sad. And the NHL as a whole has kind of become numb to it almost, is that there seems to be a lack of awareness about sexual assault within the NHL on multiple levels within its players, but also within its organizations that participate in the NHL. Like we've seen, like there were allegations that came out against Jake Virtanen, and that whole situation, which ended up him getting waived from the Canucks and bought out, and like there's been a whole bunch of stuff that's gone on in the NHL that's been very yucky, very gross, and very disappointing. Logan Mailloux, after this kind of whole situation came into the news, he made a formal public statement saying that he was renouncing himself from the draft, and he didn't want to be drafted.
Right.
Because he wanted to go back to London, play under a year of hockey, live with the consequences, and try and learn from his mistakes and make a difference. And he wanted to be excited about his draft year and being drafted because he believes that is a privilege, not a right. And he doesn't believe that he's earned that privilege. Those were his words. And
this is terrible, but let's be real. There's a lot of sex offenders out there who show 0% of the apparent self-awareness and remorse that Logan showed. Time will tell how much he means it, and time will tell what happens with him now that he was drafted against his wishes. But, I think that it was... I'm having trouble finding the words for this, but I think at the very least he appears to have recognized how unacceptable and how disgusting his behavior was. He came out and not only apologized for it, but has expressed a desire to begin to make amends by foregoing the draft, realizing that being drafted is a privilege. He's expressed a desire to live with the consequences of his actions and try to become a better man in the future. I certainly hope, for his sake, for the sake of the woman he took advantage of, and for the hockey world in general, that he means these words, because it's so important to... Again, I don't know, I feel like when somebody has been violated like this, words don't really do it justice, but at the same time, I think redemption is very important, and remorse and facing the consequences of your actions is very, very important. And the fact that Logan's even expressed a desire to do so, I think is a good sign. And for one, I hope that he's able to follow through on that. But the Montreal Canadiens, I think, did him a disservice. They did themselves a disservice. They did that woman a disservice. And they did women in general, dare I say it, a disservice, because this, to me and to a lot of other people, says that sexual assault or sexual harassment and sexual misconduct is not serious. That you can do this and still keep your job and still
be a first-round pick.
Still be a first-round pick, still get signed to still be entitled to a, 6-7 figure contract, almost as if he didn't do this. And I think I read a headline where it said that the Montreal Canadiens actually tried to defend this pick.
Oh, yeah.
To a certain... I have no idea where they're coming from. The message you're sending is pretty clear. It's that, hey, this person has been caught in an act of sexual harassment. He himself has owned that mistake and said, this is not okay, and I don't want to be drafted because I need to face the consequences of this horrible thing. And Montreal said, no, we're going to draft you because we think you're a good hockey player, and that is more important than what you've done as a human being. I don't understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I am frustrated at the complete and utter bullshit and hypocrisy that is coming from the Montreal Canadiens organization right now. Because what happened after this pick is the Montreal Canadiens knew this was going to happen. They had prepared a statement already. They put out the statement a few minutes after selecting Logan on Twitter, saying that, basically we're here to support this individual. It didn't mention the victim at all. We're here to support this individual. We believe this person is on the right track towards, redemption. But didn't mention the individual, didn't mention the fact that this person didn't want to be drafted. It's more like we're here to support this hockey player. And it's kind of like, what are you doing at this moment? And you're kind of like doubling down almost, like we're here to defend this person, and you're
Well, first of all, when the person themselves relinquishes their desire to be drafted and acknowledges the severity of their mistake, and you draft him anyways, you are in no way supporting that person.
Exactly.
You are picking his physical talents and his athletic talents in a self-serving way with regards to your organization. That is all that is happening here. Let's not pretend that anything else is happening here.
Exactly. They saw a top talent fall at the bottom of the first round. And a whole bunch of people, even the Montreal Canadiens, are trying to justify it and saying if we didn't pick him, somebody else would have. Well,
does that make it okay?
Two wrongs don't make a right, and this is simple grade 4 logic where if I don't punch David in the face, somebody else might, so I'm gonna punch David in the face. I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense. No. And then what ended up happening after this is on opening day of free agency, the Montreal Canadiens owner, Jeff Molson, came out and basically talked about how they had regretted the pick kind of thing, where they didn't realize that this is going to be such a problem. There was going to be so much backlash.
How do you not realize
I'm
that?
You put out a statement 10 minutes after drafting the kid and you didn't think this was going to happen?
Oh, and also you have to have the self-awareness of a 2-year-old to not see the fact that this was a problem coming.
Right? And the problem is they did it on free agency day. So after an hour of it being there, free agency opened and all of these draft picks were signed and it got buried in the news.
Of course it did.
So the Montreal Canadiens, if they really regretted and they wanted to change anything, they could renounce the pick and they could do what the Arizona Coyotes did with Mitchell Miller the year prior.
Exactly.
And just allow him to not be to be a UFA, to be a free agent, and say, we're not signing you, you're released from our organization.
Yeah.
You're done.
Yeah.
And you can enter the draft again next year. But they don't do that because then they would have egg on their face for taking a player in the first round who they can't have in their organization anymore.
Well, I mean, listen, I think they, even just by picking Logan in a situation like this, it's not just egg. I think they took a large piece of horse poop and threw it on their own face. And now the fact that they're trying to double down on it, I think we're in agreement with a lot of other people that this, at best, is an extreme lack of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. And at worst, it's hypocritical, borderline unethical bullshit because, geez, I say because I'm not sure what else to say at this moment in time. It's indefensible. If I was Logan, and if he truly believes in the remorse that he has expressed for his actions, if I was Logan, I wouldn't sign a contract. I wouldn't play for Montreal. I would, and I hope he does the right thing. I hope he sticks to the principles that he has appeared to express and say, no, I've done a terrible thing and I need to own up to that before I get to really continue with my professional career. And, I think the woman that he took advantage of deserves that. And I think that in order for him to really grow as a human being, he should do something like that where he's like, listen, even though this organization picked me, I'm going to stick to my guns and I'm going to forego this and I'm going to try my best to make amends for what I did.
Yeah, and I think for Logan, that's where you have to be at right now. Like, you just have to focus on trying to do the right thing, trying to make amends in whatever way you can, make awareness to the situation about, how this is bad and how this is negative and everything. But I think that this is, it's tough for Logan because he didn't ask to be put in this situation. In fact, he specifically asked not to be put in this situation, right? But, here he is, and it's unfortunate that the Montreal Canadiens made him into it made him have to be in this situation. And, I don't think that the Montreal Canadiens should look at this situation fondly. But again, this is a hockey team making a hockey decision without any care for other people's personal life. And it's unfortunate because there's more to hockey than that, just what's on the ice.
Yeah, before we move on, I think this really counterpoints to what we were talking about earlier with the Olympics. Like, in the Olympics, we not only cheer for people as athletes, but we cheer for them as people and for their stories and for the positive things that can happen in the world of sports. Obviously, a lot of negative things happen in the world of sports also, and it's far from the first time that a team or an organization has, shall we say, done nothing to help when a negative thing, a crime, has been committed against an innocent person. But to see it continue to happen, it will never not be disappointing. I think if you were raised right, it will never not be disappointing to you. I think that if you were raised right, you're not okay with this, and it's man, like human nature is human nature. I think that's all else I have to say about it. And we hope that Logan does the right thing for himself, for the woman he hurt, and for his family and his community, and as well. And we would like to finish on an actual cheery note, so we're going to do that, and we're going to switch to another sport. The Canadian women's soccer team. No doubt everybody has heard that they made history earlier this week, defeating the United States in a major competition for the first time in 20 years. Tyson, I remember that highly controversial game in 2012 where it was an exciting back and forth game, but also a lot of dicey officiating at best. And unfortunately, we as Canadians came out on the losing end of that, managed to regroup for a bronze, which I was super proud of our ladies. But to be able to not only beat the U.S., but to just smother them. 0 goals allowed against a program that has been the class of the world for the past 10 plus years was truly impressive. Our goalkeeper, sorry, this is soccer. Our goalkeeper, Stephanie Labbé, has battled through injuries to